Hey, Wonderhussy here, parked out in the middle of the desert, trying to solve a mystery. That's right, another unsolved mystery in the vast and mysterious Mojave Desert. Now, this one I read about in an old issue of Desert magazine. Okay, some of you watching this might remember Desert magazine. I guess it was a pretty popular magazine back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s, all about exploring the desert. And when I was at the Shoshone Museum the other day, researching the ghost town of Evelyn, if you watched that video I made, well, I went back into the research room there where my sister works, and they had a bunch of old issues of Desert magazine, and I happened to see this article about the Amargosa mystery rings. Okay, I'm actually disappointed in Desert magazine for misspelling Amargosa. A lot of people call it Amargosa, but that's incorrect. The name of the river and the river valley is Amargosa, and it comes from the Spanish word bitter, amargo, because when the old Spanish trail travelers were passing through this area and they tried to drink the water of the what would become known as Amargosa River, well, they found it to be bitter, it's very alkaline, and it's not good to drink. So amargosa means bitter in Spanish. And a lot of people get that wrong and pronounce it Amargosa, which that's not how it's spelled. And it's interesting because they did spell it right there, the Amargosa Valley. They just got the title wrong. Okay, editing aside, it was a pretty interesting article because it concerns these mystery rings that I guess some guy found in the desert not too far from here. And this is a photocopy of a photograph, so it's not the best resolution, but you can kind of make them out. There. Maybe that one's better. Well, apparently there's this giant row of these giant circles carved into the earth not too far from where I live. And so I thought it might be fun to get out my drone and go take a look. I drove over here to an undisclosed location in the desert to hike up on top of a mesa and see if I could find these circles. Now, I'm trying not to give too many details as to the exact location of these mystery circles, because I think to this day there's still people who think they might have some kind of serious archaeological significance. This story actually kind of reminds me of the video I made about the early man site just outside Barstow. Okay, if you watch that video, it was about this archaeological dig site out in the desert that some archaeologist found back in the 1960s, and she thought there was a whole bunch of stone hand tools there that dated back to some crazy prehistoric time, way before anybody thought there were human Homo sapiens in North America. And then it turned out to just be a giant boondoggle. They just were triangular rocks blown out of some volcano many years ago, and it had nothing to do with prehistoric man. Well, this story kind of reminds me of that. Oh, wow. I found the circles already. This was way easier than I expected. And they're much more defined than I expected them to be. Look at that. I mean, there's a series of them, and they go quite a ways that way, of these perfectly formed circles with gravel piled up in the middle of them in a perfectly straight line. Wow, I've actually never hiked out here before. Obviously, I didn't even know about their existence. But when I was reading up on them and all the materials I got from the museum in that magazine article, honestly, I wasn't expecting this to be very much. I mean, some old circles in the dirt that some guy wrote an article about back in January 1976. Golly, 1976 was forever ago. It's almost 50 years ago. Surely there couldn't be much left. But how wrong I was. I mean, they're still here, pretty much plain as day. I feel like I don't even really need to bust out my drone to look at them. We can see them from ground level, but I feel like they might be a little bit more impressive from an aerial view. So let me fire up the old Mavic Mini. Okay, wow. Those circles actually looked pretty impressive from the air, or at least they were impressive to me. And they certainly don't look like they're naturally occurring. I mean, I feel like that's something we can all agree on. Whatever the origin of these circles was, they didn't just happen naturally. Or at least I'm almost positive. I mean, I've never seen anything like this naturally occurring. Okay, so if they weren't created by Mother Nature, who were they created by? I mean, I'm not saying it was aliens, but... And I guess that was one of the prevailing theories back in the day. Remember, 1960s, 1970s, UFO stuff was really hot because of that book. I think it was called Chariots of the Gods, and I guess it was kind of the beginning of the whole ancient astronauts theory. If you're familiar with the concept of ancient astronauts, I guess basically it's this distant civilization came to Earth thousands of years ago and gave, kind of like the movie 2001, gave prehistoric man the idea for all these, you know, technological marvels that we've since come up with. Like, you know how in 2001 those cavemen are all squatting in the desert, you know, scratching themselves, and then dun 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 dun, that giant black monolith appears, and it gives them the idea to use their bones as weapons. And then of course it wasn't very long at all until they created a bone big enough to destroy them all. Or at least that's the Reader's Digest version of my understanding of that fantastic movie. Anyway, I guess back in the day, some thought that these mysterious circles were made by some race of aliens thousands of years ago. I guess as some kind of navigational aid. Now, according to what I read in that article, there's a line here of 29 of these things, and I didn't see 29 flying my drone around. My guess is some of them maybe have eroded over the years, I'm not sure. Which, speaking of that, it's interesting to see the way these things are. It's almost like if you're familiar with geoglyphs, like those large-scale earth artworks. Like I made one, oh gosh, down in Bouse, Arizona, the Bouse fishermen, I think it was called. Basically native peoples, I don't know if they gouged or just smoothed these shapes into the, I think they call this desert pavement. Because believe it or not, yeah, there is a lot of soft sand in the desert, you know, sand dunes, blowing sand. But there's also some really hard-packed areas, and I'm not going to try to mess this up. I would never presume to mess up these desert circles. I'm just showing you. It's very hard-packed. And so I don't know if these things, well, maybe they were created by ancient peoples by just smoothing these circles. And then, I mean, it looks like there's rocks piled up in the middle. I mean, the rocks, I don't, you probably can't tell, but the gravel piles in the middle of each circle are probably like 3-4 inches higher, maybe even 5 inches higher than the surrounding ground. It's probably really hard to tell on camera, but yeah, there's little gradual mounds of gravel about 4 or 5 inches high in the middle of these perfectly formed circles. And I don't need to tell you that ancient peoples did not have compasses. You know, like a compass that you use to draw a perfect circle? These were just done freehand. You know, the more I look at these circles, the more I really am starting to wonder. I mean, I'll be honest. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you know I'm a pretty big skeptic when it comes to anything to do with ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot. And so I came out here today like, oh, LOL, I'll fly my drone, I'll shoot some footage, like, you know, what could it really be? But looking at them in person, I'm really starting to wonder. I mean, I don't know that I'm a proponent of the ancient aliens theory, as seductive as it is. I mean, I love the idea of there having been a race of aliens that visited this planet thousands of years ago and did all this weird stuff. I'd love to see aliens now. You know, many's the time I've gone out in the middle of nowhere camping, laying in a hot spring, looking at the skies going, aliens, please come beam me up. Probe me if that's what it takes. You know how they always say they get probed? Well, I'll say this on the record right now. I am willing, if any aliens happen to be watching this video, I am willing to be probed if that's what it takes to prove to me that you're real. So, you know, hit me up. And I guess the ancient alien theory was sort of bolstered by the fact that, okay, so there's a row supposedly of 28, 29 of these things stretching in a straight north-south line, but then over there about 2 miles, there's supposedly some weird V-shaped formation. And I don't know where this V-shaped formation is. I was all over Google Earth, okay? Not even just Google Maps, you know, Google Earth, you can go into 3D, and I looked all over the desert there, and I didn't see what this guy was talking about. But in the article, he says he spotted some V-shaped thing over there that's sort of pointing to the line, and that's what made him think that maybe it was used as some kind of navigational aid for these aliens. So I don't know about this being any kind of navigational aid, but that was only one theory. The ancient aliens theory was only one of many theories about whence came this line of strange rings. Okay, apparently as far back as 1966, remember that Desert Magazine article was from 76, January of 76. Well, 10 years prior to that, this guy named Malcolm Rogers published a book called Ancient Hunters of the Far West. And his theory was that about 10,000 years ago, ancient peoples migrated down from, well, I guess when they crossed the land bridge from Asia to Alaska, when it was still crossable, then they made their way down through Canada and down through the southwestern United States through this part of the desert on their way to Central and South America. And so these ancient peoples, as they were traveling along, living their lives, I guess he was sort of following their tracks, and he found evidence of them here, there. I don't think his theory was ever proven or that there's any legitimacy to it, but in this book, I guess he posits that these rings were maybe made by ancient peoples as long ago as 5,000 years. Now, I don't know, 5,000 years is a long time for dirt circles to hang around. You know, that's 5,000 years of windstorms and rainstorms and floods, and you know, you would just expect these things to have been eroded over that length of time. And that's kind of what Gary Richardson, who's the guy who wrote that Desert Magazine article, thought. I guess in addition to this line of 28, 29 circles up on top of this mesa, apparently he found some local guy in the town where I now live who had hiked around and found all these things. And so he got that guy to come out and kind of show him where they were. And that guy had identified dozens more, I think up to 100 of these circles, but the rest of them weren't as well defined, and they were down in these washes, in these soft sandy washes. So if these things were 5,000 years old, the circles he found in the washes would be completely washed away after even 100 years, let alone 5,000. So even though the ones that he found out there were, I guess, less prominent, they were still there. And so there's no way they could have been made 5,000 years ago. And again, I not only played around on Google Earth, but I also flew my drone around quite a bit. I didn't see any evidence of any other circles out here, but apparently, yeah, the local guy found like over 100 of them. But because of the fact that a lot of them were in those soft sandy washes, Gary Richardson, the Desert Magazine journalist, he didn't think they were that old, but he was curious, you know, being a journalist, he wanted to figure out, okay, so if they aren't, and he did not subscribe to the ancient aliens theory, so if they weren't from ancient aliens and they weren't made by prehistoric man, what other explanation could there be for these mysterious circles? Well, I guess Gary Richardson was a man of science, a skeptic, a cynic, if you will, like me, and I guess he was talking to some old borax miner in the area. There's a lot of borax mining in this area historically, or there was. Some old borax miner said, well, these look an awful lot like borax prospects to me. Okay, I don't know anything about borax mining, especially not in the old-timey days, but apparently one way that you could figure out if there was borax in the soil was, I guess borax rises to the top of the soil like this white puffy crust or like dusty crust. And so if you pour water on a section of dirt and wait long enough, the borax will sort of bubble to the top and leave this white poofy crystalline dust. And so apparently forming little circles like this could have just been a way to see if there was any borax in the soil. I mean, oh, look at this one. It almost looks like there is some white crust coming out of it. Let's see, is this borax? I am not a chemist. I don't think borax even has a taste, so I'm actually not going to taste this. I don't know. I mean, maybe these were just borax prospects, but if they were borax prospects, why would you make so many of them right in a row this close together? You know, it seems like you'd space them out a little bit. So again, I'm not saying it was aliens, and I'm not saying these were made by prehistoric man, but I don't know. To me, it doesn't make sense that they were borax prospects. I mean, for real, why would you come up on top of this mesa and prospect for borax 29 times right next to each other like this? And meanwhile, there's no other circles, well, that I can see anywhere else around. And also, how would these borax prospectors have made such perfect circles? I mean, again, people didn't have, you know, geometry tools back then to be drawing these perfect circles. I mean, I guess you could just tie a string on a stick and do it the old-fashioned way. Oh, that's actually a good point. But actually, what it said in that Desert Magazine article, and again, this was written in 1976, so please forgive the language of the time, but I guess they said coolie labor was used to do these. And okay, coolies, I think, was kind of like a derogatory term for the Chinese laborers. Like, first they came over to work on the railroads, and then they came out here, and a lot of Chinese worked in the borax mines. As a matter of fact, the date ranch out here, there's a big date ranch oasis. You can go down and get a date shake and hike all over. It's a beautiful place. Well, it's called China Ranch because I think it was, back in the day, stolen from a Chinese guy who developed it and made it into a lush oasis. Anyway, I guess my point in all of that is just, yes, there were a lot of Chinese miners in this area, and they called them coolies. And apparently, according to this article, they worked with mechanical precision. I'm not super woke, but it did come off as kind of racist to me. Anyway, I guess one theory as to why they're so perfectly formed is because these mechanically precise coolies were responsible for digging them. And supposedly, if you go to the Harmony Borax Works in Death Valley National Park, you can see really precise, round piles of borax, or I don't know, some kind of little round piles out there too. So it sounded to me like Gary Richardson pretty much believed that these were probably just made by some borax mining operation, which there was. The Amargosa Borax Works was just right down the road there. I guess what happens when you're mining borax, if it's too hot, the borax won't even crystallize. And so during the summer, they couldn't get borax out of Death Valley because it was too hot. The borax wouldn't crystallize. So they had another operation out here, which I can't imagine this is any cooler in the summer. I mean, yeah, I guess Furnace Creek at the lowest point in Death Valley is, well, it can get up to like 130 degrees in the summer. Out here, we typically only get to about 120. So yeah, there was borax out here. And, well, maybe these circles were multiple close together prospects. But I guess what really sealed the deal for Gary Richardson is he found some old maps of the U.S. Borax and Chemical Company's Amargosa Borax claim. And I guess the boundaries of that claim almost perfectly coincided with this line of circles and all those other circles that the other guys showed him that I couldn't find. Which I guess they kind of go in a zigzag pattern, and it really matches up with the border of this claim perfectly. So it's almost like they came out here and dug these things just to mark their claim boundary. But again, that doesn't really make sense, because why would you make so many of them so close together? I mean, if you're marking the boundary of a claim, you know, do one every 50 feet or something, or on the corners. But I guess he said they even found little wooden stakes coming out of the middle of some of the piles with square-headed nails in the stakes, which definitely sounds like, well, neither ancient astronauts nor ancient peoples on their way to South America would have had wooden stakes and square-headed nails. That sounds like a surefire sign of old-time miners and prospectors. So I don't know what to believe after all this and coming out here and looking at this stuff with my own two peepers. I'm even more confused than I was at the outset of this little adventure. I don't know. What do you guys think? Ancient aliens? Ancient peoples? Or borax mining? But Gary Richardson, being the professional journalist that he was, or maybe is, I don't know. Gary Richardson might still be alive. And hey, Gary, if you're watching this, hi. Anyway, I guess he dug into it and tried to find records from the U.S. Borax Company to see if they would have dug little holes like this as part of a boundary marking thing. But unfortunately, all their files from the U.S. Borax Company were burned in the fires after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. I guess they were based in San Francisco. So unfortunately, there's no records from the mining company. We might never know if this really was just meant to mark a claim boundary or what. I guess it's just gonna have to remain a mystery. And speaking of mysteries, well, you might be wondering why I said at the beginning of this video that this reminded me of the early man site video that I made. Well, it's because there was a similar kind of much ado over nothing, essentially. So at the early man site, remember the lady found all those triangular rocks. She thought they were hand axes. Really, they were just rocks. And so they got all this funding from the National Geographic Society to do this archaeological dig, basically for nothing. Well, here with these circles, I guess there were a lot of unnamed locals who were very passionate about this site. In fact, there still are to this day. I was told not to divulge the location of these because there's a lot of people who do still think that it's a legit ancient archaeological artifact or resource, and it should be protected from off-roaders and treasure hunters and hikers, and people are going to come up here and vandalize them, which I know how people are. People will come vandalize anything. They'd vandalize their own mother's grave. So I get wanting to protect these things, but I don't know. I guess at one time they even filed I don't know what you would call it. They filed a petition or a claim or a motion with the BLM to protect these things as a cultural relic, antiquity. And so the BLM, I think, actually did earmark funds to build a fence around these circles and preserve them for future generations. Which, yeah, if they were created by ancient peoples migrating through here on their way south, or if they were created by ancient aliens, they're definitely worthy of taxpayer-funded protection. But if it's just a bunch of circles made by coolies to find borax, well, I don't know, it just doesn't seem quite that historical. Although, I don't know, you go to the Harmony Borax Works in Death Valley, that's a big deal. You know, who's to say that mechanically precise coolie circles aren't worthy of taxpayer-funded protection? I hate to think how much that fence was going to cost that they were going to put up around this. I think this Desert Magazine article, or at least Gary Richardson himself, kind of put the kibosh on that whole idea. Like, after he came out and did his investigation and figured out that it was probably just a boundary marker, I think the whole idea of the fence just kind of fell to the wayside. Because, you know, there's a lot of other more pressing concerns to be spending taxpayer money on than protecting some circles of indeterminate origin in the middle of the desert. Am I right? So anyway, I don't know what these circles were, but I do think it's interesting that they're right off the highway, and there's people passing by here all day, every day, who have no idea that there's some weird, unexplained mystery circles on top of the mesa right next to them. It's just one of, like I said at the beginning, many mysteries in this vast and mysterious landscape. And it's one of the things I love most about living in the desert. You know, you just don't see this kind of thing in the forest. Anyway, that's pretty much all there is to this line of mystery circles. I have no idea. If you do, please let us know in the comment section below. What do you think? Ancient astronauts? Early man? Or borax miners? Or were they made by something else altogether? Some giant cosmic hole punch in the sky. No one knows who they were or what they were doing, but their legacy remains hewn into the living rock of Death Valley. Death Valley, where the demons dwell. Remember that song Stonehenge from Spinal Tap? Just kind of reminded me of that. Anyway, I'll shut up now, but leave your comments below and let us know what you think these circles are. Meanwhile, I guess I'm gonna get back in my car and roll on down the road to investigate more mysteries of Death Valley and the greater mysterious Mojave Desert.